Thank you for joining us for the Johns Hopkins Disability Disparities webinar series, a forum to share diverse perspectives about disability inequities. Today's session is 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act, celebrating the past, present, and future of disability civil rights. I am Bonnielin Swenor, an associate professor and director of the Johns Hopkins Disability Health Research Center. And today I am joined by 4 panelists from across Johns Hopkins University. I want to welcome Sabrina Epstein, who's an undergraduate student and rising senior at Johns Hopkins University. Sabrina is completing an internship with the Disability Health Research Center and has experience as a disability advocate. Kathy Axe, who is the executive director of the Johns Hopkins Student Disability Services, which spans the entire university and has a focus on increasing accessibility and inclusion. Kathy has spent over 25 years of her career in disability services across a range of higher education institutions, expanding awareness and improving disability services. Gloria Ramsey is also joining us, who is the inaugural Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. Gloria has been a nurse and attorney engaged in interdisciplinary research and provided leadership to national projects focusing on end-of-life care and advanced care planning for African American patients and families and people with disabilities. Gloria is also an advocate for engaging racially and ethnically diverse populations and faith communities for participation in research and partnering on community-based health disparity interventions. Our 4th panelist is Hodukavich, who is the ADA Compliance Officer with the Johns Hopkins University Office of Institutional Equity. Aaron is a licensed attorney who has practiced educational law and has extensive experience with ADA policy. I want to thank you all for being a part of this panel as we reflect and celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act on July 26th. Okay. Aaron, I want to start with you. From your perspective, what are the greatest successes that the ADA has facilitated for the disability community?
Thanks, Dr. Swenor. I think that there's been a lot of successes with the ADA, but probably first among them is access to public accommodations and state and local buildings. Before the ADA was passed, the simple act of meeting a friend for lunch, you had 1 or 2 options. You could either go to a place that you were familiar with and that you knew was accessible and would meet your needs, or you could go through a lot of advanced planning to make sure that there was an accessible route to get to there, and that once you did get there, that it was going to be accessible, for you to get in the door. And so just the simple fact of being able to patronize banks, supermarkets, retail establishments, and then things like participating in civic life. So participation on juries, entering courthouses, being able to go into the DMV are all developments that really came after the ADA, because prior to the ADA, there really wasn't any obligations for buildings to be accessible unless they were built with federal dollars or they were federal buildings. And so the ADA ushered in just a new round of expectations that when new buildings are constructed or that substantial alterations are made, that those buildings need to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. I think it's important to point out that the 2010 standards for accessible design, which are the code that new construction and alterations need to follow, really address physical disabilities. And I think that there's still been some populations that are left out of that, including, people with sensory disabilities or things that aren't really a large part in the 2010 standards, which we may see, coming in future iterations.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly have achieved so much in the past 30 years, but have room left to grow and improve. So with that, Sabrina, from your perspective, what do you think are the greatest challenges for the disability community today, even with the ADA? And how do you think we can work to address those challenges? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, well, it's hard to name one single challenge, but an urgent challenge today is certainly thinking about the COVID pandemic and preventing policymakers from using the pandemic as an opportunity to roll back disability rights and the progress that we have made in these past 30 years. We're seeing across the country on all levels using the pandemic as an excuse to take away our rights from the Department of Education, trying to take away resources from students with 504 plans and IEPs, nursing homes and institutions not being required to report COVID statistics and thus being able to get away with gross negligence of the many disabled patients there, and medical rationing policies that are failing to consider disabled patients and that our lives are worth living. And to address this, I think it's really about using the pandemic as an opportunity to first improve access to the things that we're seeing more now, like telehealth and virtual events and work from home, which can all be used as accommodations not only now, but in the future. So we can work on their accessibility now. And also to address the many health inequities that have been amplified by the pandemic, both from a disability perspective, but also making sure to keep intersectionality in mind and understand that Black and Brown disabled people are being affected the most by these health inequities that have already existed and COVID is only amplifying.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Very, very good perspectives. So thinking more about that, Gloria, can you provide some additional perspectives about the challenges and opportunities for the ADA for people with disabilities? You have a really unique perspective yourself as both a researcher and someone that works with policy.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much, Dr. Swenor. And I also want to say that in addition to my professional role, this is a life that I've lived for the last 30 years as well, as someone who has a mobility impairment, who uses an assistive device for ambulation. So this law really isn't perfunctory. It's really pragmatic. It's a practical application in my life, personally as well as professionally. And I think that as I begin to think about some of the challenges that are still present, and the voice I'd like to give, to bring to this discussion is around employment issues. Employment still remains a number one priority. There are so many individuals who are very interested in becoming gainful, tax abiding, paying citizens in our society. But we as a society, there is much work to be done to embrace and to invite those individuals in the fold. When we think about 1 in 4 adults, or 61 million adults have disabilities, and we think about the contributions that are arguably lost by those individuals because they're not able to engage. And what does that really mean through our employment? Certainly there, in addition to wages, which is important, that there's an additional consideration in terms of our ability to create an interdisciplinary, interprofessional work environment. I mean, we are strongest when we are more diverse and inclusive in our ways of life and our way of dealings. So I really want to say that employment remains a really an important consideration as we take a look back and think of where we are and where it is that we're going. I sit here as a very privileged person because I have had the great fortune of being employed and having been employed over the last number of decades. So, but I'm very sensitive to the persons that I speak with who are grappling, who really desire to, and many of these people have completed college. It's not that they don't have the skills or to bring to the workforce, but I think that we need to ask, do we have the political will? And that are we willing to really embrace the true intent of this law, that this is a major civil rights concern and that this is a human rights issue that we should address and certainly include as many persons who are able and interested in the fall. So that's one issue around education. And the second issue I'd certainly like to highlight that I know personally well is the housing concern. We have a huge deficit in our society for accessible housing, but not only merely accessible. We can put a ramp out, we can remove the steps in terms of physical barriers, but accessible in terms of financial. When you begin to think about the 61 million persons who may be recipient of services of our government support, that the wages are far meager in consideration to what is it that a person needs. I had a conversation not long ago with someone in New York, and affordable housing, you needed to earn $65,000 a year as a baseline to have access to this housing. And as an individual who had spent 30 some odd years gainfully employed and contributed greatly to our society, the wages was far less than that, as you can appreciate. And therefore, the concern about how might one locate accessible, affordable housing is a major barrier. And it's something that it's for each of us to consider, not only those with disabilities, because as we age, the accommodations that we're seeking are important for all of society. So those are the two things that I think remains important as we continue to build on the two prior comments, two prior panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Those are wonderful additions to this conversation. And before I move on to Kathy's question, I just want to echo some of these important points that, the ADA is a starting point, right? And I think that's commonly a missed concept. And to some of the points that were just made about employment and housing, is that there are still many structural barriers in the world we live in, even in the world with the ADA, for many people with disabilities. And so we still, again, have a long way to go. And so as we think about that, and as we think about the issues that were just raised, employment and perhaps even education being one of them, Kathy, my question is for you, is what do you think the role of academia, science, and medicine could play in the future of the disability community, and maybe starting to address some of these disability inequities?
Sure, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for what you've brought to the table so far, because I think as we recognize the progress we've made, I think it's really important to look at how we can be more effective, especially within the higher education realm, in moving things forward. And I think one of the challenges really remains that there is an active sort of piece of ableism that is still very much infused in our higher education institutions. This assumption that people with disabilities either cannot do the work or do not belong here, they're underprepared or unmotivated. And those are tough things to hear, but I think this is really some of the underlying pieces that we're still up against. And the ADA has done a lot to help us really recognize the civil rights involved. But I think where we all play a role is what we bring to helping people to overcome assumptions and to really have the perspective we'd want that everyone is meant to be part of higher education. And how do we help facilitate that? Some of these are conversations, like really bringing disability into the diversity conversations and helping people to understand unique contributions people bring, and that it's important to our communities to have these perspectives reflected within the academic sort of tracks that people are following. There are many fields, for example, where part of the field itself may be involved in asking some really critical questions about, how do we work on finding solutions and healthcare cures, but also reflecting the importance of the diversity of the population that may be actually managing a condition that currently exists, in both finding those solutions and also facilitating the access to the roles, like as Gloria just mentioned, being part of the workforce, being part of the research, being part of the teaching. All those roles are really important for students to see people with disabilities in, so they know that they can be there too. And I think this also goes back to recognizing people's intersectional identities, and the importance of understanding that we still have barriers, and some of those barriers may be amplified for some of our students, and how do we work to have people that can actually support them through that process. We also talk a little bit about conversations, and I think these conversations are happening more and more frequently. This is an improvement in recent years. I think disability studies is a really important field, and it's just starting to be recognized and infused into the curricula at many universities. That's some work that I think is really important. It not only reflects how progressive attitudes really see disability and the importance of us kind of considering old messages and how they're not currently working in terms of how we approach policy, how we approach decision making, how we approach, kind of making things work for people. And I think another important element of that is the nothing about us without us element of making sure that we're not making decisions for people with disabilities without including them in those dialogues. We can't possibly understand experiences without those firsthand accounts. We can't possibly make the most effective decisions if we don't know the concerns and the barriers. And some of this too is looking at sort of reframing disability, moving from our very medical model of disability, which centers the barriers within the person, to really understanding that a lot of the barriers are truly social and cultural in terms of how we look at disability. And if we can get our heads around that piece, that's a really important element of removing those barriers effectively. And that kind of gets to the second really big point, I think, and that is just making sure we're taking the approach of not just providing accessibility or following the letter of the law, but looking at how we can make our community truly one where people belong and feel included and thrive, right? Like, it's not about just being able to get there, although that is critical and important, but once you're there, how are these students able to both feel comfortable with the climate and identifying their needs and speaking out if something's not working, and also how they're able to sort of actively engage in their studies and any pursuits they have at the university without constantly running into barriers or having to have things done one at a time. So I think taking a much more proactive than reactive stance is really going to enable the community to really welcome and include students in a far more effective way. And this is true of all of our community members, because every accommodation that we've made sort of individually usually helps a broader group. And how do we kind of get ahead of that process, both looking at our physical accessibility, our technological accessibility, and also our programmatic accessibility? Like, how do we make our programs less traditional, less sort of tied to doing things a certain way, and more adaptable, more flexible? How do we make it an easier process for people to be part of that? And then the final thing is the collaboration and the communication, like really engaging, everyone seeing their role in this process. Because I do think that the tendency is to think the ADA may have solved things that it can't without our actual work to implement it effectively and to take it beyond the letter of the law to really what is meant to be the spirit of the law.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I think taking forward the spirit of the ADA to advance disability inclusion, to me, is the future. And I do think that academic institutions, which tend to be the epicenter of societal change, really do have a valuable role in doing that. And to sort of connect the dots of all the things we talked about today, I do see that there is a powerful opportunity to address some of the structural barriers and enhance the interpretation or the uptake of the ADA, and facilitate better inclusion of people with disabilities by some focus on academic institutions. Right? So we are training and educating the next generation, and the way that we talk about disability matters. Right? The way that we include people matters. And we need to start to focus on that from my perspective. And so along those lines, I want to ask each of you, what role does our institution, does Johns Hopkins have in the future of disability inclusion in taking all of this forward? And if you wish, can each of you speak about maybe some work or initiatives that you're involved with towards those goals or initiatives in moving this all forward for the future? I'm going to start with you, Erin. I'm going to go in the same order.
Well, I want to go back to, Gloria's point about employment, because I think employment is one area that was, when the ADA was passed, it was meant to, eliminate employment discrimination, and it requires, employers to engage in the interactive process about reasonable accommodations. But if you look at, the employee, the unemployment rate of people with disabilities, it's still very high. I mean, I think 2019, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it was 7.3% was the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. People without disabilities was 3.5%. So, I mean, we're talking more than double the, the amount of people with disabilities are unemployed. And I think we need to look at, why that is. And if you look at, my role at Johns Hopkins, I handle workplace accommodations for faculty and staff. And so one of my objectives in that process is trying to make that as an inclusive experience as possible. Looking at, what is the request, and is it reasonable in the context of, our workplace, rather than, concentrating on the individual's, health condition, or whether it rises to the level of, something that would be something we would need to accommodate. I'm trying to build a culture that we're looking at, what is the request and is it reasonable given the context of the workplace? And in many times, you really don't need to go much into, the nature of the disability, but you're really looking at, well, what is the request, and is it reasonable, given essential job functions and given, undue hardship. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is to educate, hiring managers that most workplace accommodations are little to no cost, because I think it does come back to stigma again. There's a stigma associated with disability still. There's a stigma associated with reasonable accommodation, that these are going to be these expensive, mechanisms that we need to provide. And really, that's not the case in most instances. And even when you do have an accommodation that has some cost associated with it, you look at the value that having a diverse workforce brings to an employer, it really backs up, we should be accommodating as many people as we can, and we should be embracing, the employment of people with disabilities.
Thank you, Erin. I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I'm so grateful for the work you and your office are doing. Sabrina, do you want to talk about, from your perspective, what Hopkins can be doing?
Yeah, so Kathy talked about the value of community and disability and at higher education institutions, and my work and my experience at Hopkins has really been rooted in that principle. I've spent the first 3 years of undergrad working to develop a disability community, and mostly for the undergraduate students at Homewood, and I'm now working with some graduate students at both campuses to try to bridge that and create more programming at the medical campus as well, and just ensure that disabled people have a place at Hopkins, because the community really is valuable, both in helping us survive, but also in helping the institution become a more equitable and diverse place to be. And I think that Hopkins certainly has quite a bit of power and prestige, that by leading the charge to be an accessible and disability inclusive campus and institution overall, we can set an incredible example for other institutions. And I would love for disability inclusion to be one of the things that we were ranked on, or for prospective students to know that we have a disability community here and that they'll have a place here. Because from the academic perspective, but also things like COVID reopening plans and research that's happening on all the different campuses, there's such an opportunity to lead in disability inclusion. And we're certainly seeing that grow here at Hopkins. Every day I'm hearing about more initiatives like this, which is really exciting.
Thank you, Sabrina, and you definitely undersold yourself. You've been a huge game changer here at this university in your 3 years here, and I know I'm grateful for the advocacy work you've done as an undergrad, so thank you. Gloria?
Yeah, thanks very much. To add on to Sabrina's comments and all, I really see us as sort of like rebranding the scales of justice, that we have a unique opportunity in the university's history and our future to really just do that. I think that as we think about our brand, we're nationally and internationally and globally known. And I would like to really echo how is it that we are shifting the culture. And that shift of that culture is really going to give rise to the educational experience, but also to poise us for the workforce experience. Is that, you know, these are two very important linkages. You know, when I think about my own academic preparation, a more professional school, there was only 1% of persons with disabilities in the field, not my school or the program, you know, almost 30 years ago, but, you know, 1%. And so that can't be, that we have to normalize this, that it's not an exception to the rule. And certainly we cannot make the individual who have the courage to proceed be the person who has to think and plan and strategize each and every move that they make throughout the educational experience, that rather than embrace and meet them and identify ways that this person can grow and learn and be welcomed and see this as a place of belonging, that we, that many students that I speak with, not here at Hopkins, but just generally speaking, find that they've got to be 20 steps ahead, that if they can't think it and do it and articulate it, then that's going to be the extent and degree of their own progression. And that's something that we have to change. We have to really see that this is an urgency and that we as a society can ill afford to continue to act in this way, that we are not the best that we can be, that when we've got a segment of our society who's willing and able, with support and with accommodations, to begin to move forward. And so many times when people think that the individual needs an accommodation, you know, dollars and cents, you know, signs go up. And if you sit and talk and really begin to think through this, many times it's nominal for the contribution and the commitment and the dedication that this individual brings to an organization and is so willing to have an opportunity. They not, you know, we don't just show up, we show out. We're really working hard to make certain that the next person that comes, that we personally feel that as a poster child, that if I don't do good, then I've limited the opportunity for others. And we take that quite seriously because we really want the doors to remain open for others so that we can more broadly contribute in our society. So in the School of Nursing, as I think about us being a champion for diversity, we try to foster equity and we practice inclusivity. And healthcare needs all of that. When we are involved in the educational process, we know that those individuals who we're educating really must mirror society as those individuals go back to their respective places that they choose to practice. And I don't mean respective in a pejorative way, but where they choose to practice, that we should certainly have a healthcare workforce that's reflective of the society at large. And that includes individuals who bring this perspective to the forefront. I mean, there's something unique about what that individual brings when we're in the caring role, you know, as a clinician, as a nurse, as a scientist, as a policymaker. I don't leave that part of me at the door. I do allow it to undergird and to let some of my lived experiences shape what is it, the voice and the perspective and the advocacy that I bring. I often think that I'm not only bringing a voice for myself, but all the other people who are not seated at the table. I've been fortunate to make my way to the table, but I don't take that lightly that I represent an N of one. I really try to embody and embrace, and I don't speak for all. That's not what the message that I want our listeners to take away. But I really feel that I have a responsibility, a moral and ethical responsibility to give voice to a population that's still struggling to have the voice that the ADA promised 30 years ago. And we are still working hard. We're still working hard to fully actualize, and so that we as a society are able to move to where we're capable of going and what we're becoming. And Hopkins, our institution, has a seminal role to play in that regard. And I look forward to continuing our work from the School of Nursing and across our divisions with your leaderships to make certain that we continue to move in that direction.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I completely agree and can understand that feeling of living in both worlds, of that lived experience and the commitment to providing that voice in your work. And I'm grateful for what you're doing to do that. And I agree. We have a valuable opportunity here at Hopkins. Kathy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I think one thing that really seems very critical is the ability to sort of have multiple perspectives of disability be visible and present on the campus. And sometimes that's in the form of people that are actually open and sharing about their lived experience and able in their role to either mentor other students or to reach out to them. But a big piece of what we've been trying to do this past year, and I know that you've been a strong part of this as has Sabrina, is to be able to sort of have a greater awareness raised. And so again, some of the grants, including the 10 by 20 grant and the diversity and inclusion grant that we wrote, to actually bring a lot more awareness to the campus in the form of programming, book discussion groups, engaged ways to bring communities together. And I think we found in a surprising way that the COVID crisis has actually changed an element of what we've been doing, but in some ways for the better, because this electronic sort of access provides in some ways a greater ability for people to join us in these efforts and for more voices to be heard and recognized and for different discussions to happen. We're looking at a whole new dimension that we've been able to bring things to, and I hope it will be one that we will plan to continue, because access to events, access to information is always critical, and everyone's time is very, sometimes spread thin. And this is a way we can actually hopefully engage parts of the community that may not have so readily attended an in-person event. So I think being able to have speakers and people who are able to share their perspectives around disability with a broader population is really critical, because again, people may never have known a person who is deaf or blind. Someone may never have interacted with a colleague that had actually shared their lived experience. So to again hear a medical colleague who Dr. Jameson spoke earlier this year, speak to an audience of 120 people very openly about their personal and professional impact from their disability was very engaging and empowering. And I heard a number of people after that event feel they could openly talk about their own challenges around managing mental health in the workplace and in school. And again, creating a climate where people feel empowered and safe to be who they are is so critical, because again, I hear from a lot of people that they feel the culture in certain programs is such that they're afraid to show that they might need any type of assistance, that anything could be perceived as a weakness or something that would make them less viable. And again, by then not asking for what they need, their chances of flourishing and thriving and having their easiest, most efficient path forward can sometimes be compromised. So where do we how do we make that a safer, more inclusive place? And I do think that's going to require university-wide efforts and collaboration. And one thing I think Hopkins really does have in its favor, it is a very collaborative environment. And I really do feel like this is where we will need to work together, and everyone in their own individual role needing to look for the opportunities they have to be welcoming. Everything from making sure people with disabilities are visible whenever possible, PR efforts, on websites, in brochures, making known that we are looking to include people within our communities. The language is important too. Using that to make sure that people know that it's not an add-on or an afterthought. And I think recruiting effectively, looking at disability-related publications where you might advertise positions. That's one thing I've always done very clearly in my work, is made extra effort to work with HR around how do I recruit a diverse workforce to my area. And disability services, being a diverse group in many respects, is really part of what was, I think, some of the challenges in recent years. And how do we sort of make sure that we have the support needed, but also at the same time creating these opportunities for people to really flourish and grow while they're here. Because we do look at identity development as being a critical aspect of a college experience, especially for undergraduates. And if we're not facilitating that in all respects, we're really not enabling the students to grow in the ways that they could.
Thank you. That was a wonderful response, and I agree. There's lots of work to be done, but I think, again, as everyone has said, we have immense opportunity that I think we just need to continue this momentum. And so for the final question, I want us to continue to look a bit towards the future and think about over the next 10 years, and I know sometimes that's hard, particularly right now, to think into the future. But over the next 10 years, what do you hope that we can accomplish for disability inclusion and equity? Are there any sort of tangible goals that you would like to see happen, either at Hopkins or as a community, a society? Aaron, I'll start with you again.
Sure. Well, today we've talked a lot about disparities, that still exist 30 years after the ADA. We've talked about employment disparities. We've talked about healthcare disparities. We've talked about educational attainment disparities. And I think we need to 30 years later, sit back and ask, why do these disparities still exist? And I think we need to dig a little bit deeper into, is there other mechanisms or safeguards that we need to put into place to help address these disparities? Because we've said, it's illegal to discriminate. However, 30 years later, we have these disparities. And so why do these disparities continue to exist? And I think we need to look a little bit deeper into those questions and probably come up with some more novel solutions to, obtain kind of the spirit of the ADA, which is really to, make people with disabilities kind of on the same level playing field as everybody else. And as long as those disparities exist, that's not happening.
Yeah, great. I certainly agree. Thank you, Aaron. Sabrina?
Well, on a more tangible level, I think there's a number of initiatives like the RISE Act, which is specifically about disability in higher education and expanding the principles of the ADA and the IDEA to higher ed, which hopefully will be able to be passed in the future. Also healthcare reform and ensuring that disabled people have access to the healthcare that's one of our human rights. But in a less measurable way, I hope that we can continue building this disability community where we all get to bond over, unfortunately, the ableism that we face. And maybe one day we'll be able to bond over other things besides that, over disability culture and disability studies, like Kathy mentioned, and the wonderful creativity that is essential for living in a disabled body in a world that's not meant for us. And I hope that one day we get to live those lives too.
Thank you, Sabrina. I've said this to you before. No one gives me hope quite like you do. So I think as long as you're here, we have hope for the future. Gloria, on to you.
Yes, to build upon again Sabrina's comments, it's always so thoughtful and moving to respond, to try to build on to that. I think certainly to work strategically and intentionally, we must be committed to removing barriers. And that's not only the physical barriers for individuals who might have physical disabilities, but one community that we've alluded to that I'd like to more clearly articulate is those with non-apparent disabilities. for those individuals experiencing the barriers in a way that they are not able to come forward. And I'm so grateful to Kathy and the work of bringing one of our own faculty members to come to address issues that are not apparent. So I think that we've got lots to do to remove stigma, to remove assumptions, and those assumptions are always, oftentimes not favorable, but we need to really work towards that inclusive pedagogy that moves us to a more inclusive workplace. I think it's important that we recognize the accomplishments made, but we shouldn't rest on our laurels. And so I am optimistic with the Center for Research and Policy and Disability work that you're leading, Dr. Swenor, that becomes a really central place in our organization to continue to build and to challenge each of the 9 divisions to really think in the spirit of what the center is bringing to us as an organization, because we really need it and the time is now. We must not wait any longer. We've been talking about the social climate in our country today, and I think that this population, communities of individuals who identify as disabled, are part of this movement. We're part of this watershed movement to really begin to shift in a way that we know that we must. And we must do this with, like I said, some urgency. We know that change comes in this moment of urgency, and that we should leverage this opportunity and get individuals who are members to really speak to the democracy that we have, and get out and vote, and make certain that this watershed moment doesn't leave this community behind. And so these are all efforts that I am optimistic about, cautiously optimistic, but really wanting us to act as tomorrow isn't, here, isn't coming, like we've got to do it now. I'm grateful for the organization, our university, that when we think about the Diversity Leadership Council, which is an advisory board to the President's office, that one of the subcommittees is devoted and dedicated to looking at persons with disabilities. And these are all strategic opportunities for us to begin to intentionally shift and plan for the next, the 21st century. So I think that we're really poised, and I don't want the ADA to be a one-off, that, oh my goodness, we did the 30th and now, everyone can go back and assume their respective places. No, that's not the intention here, and that's not the spirit of us shifting the status quo.
Yes, thank you so much for your kind words. And yeah, we absolutely have to band together and keep this momentum moving forward to have change, real change, I think, at our institution and in society, for sure. Kathy, to you.
So, just in thinking if we could really envision the future the way we'd want to, I did have some sort of really concrete things. Like, one of them has been brought up a lot about sort of the workplace. And I would like to see people with disabilities working, teaching, studying, researching in a more visible and tangible way on the campus. Their input is so critical in all areas, and I think their visibility and their representation really speaks to the student body and also to the broader community that we interact with. So I think seeing that in a very visible, tangible way would really be important if we're thinking 10 years down the road. And also, as far as disability and how we serve people on the campus, moving more from a disability services model to one of a disability cultural center seems really important. I know this is starting to happen on campuses, and again, really connects well with the whole disability as diversity perspective. But I think using a center like that as a place for students to, again, meet and join people with like sort of sort of goals and objectives, but also to have the community and the support needed without having to work so hard to get it. Because I think right now it's come down to individuals sort of really taking the initiative. And I think while that's critical, we want to make sure we're facilitating that. So again, having this be a place that people can start to recognize that they would come to understand more and learn more about disability culture if they're new to it, and also as a sort of touch point to really begin to shift perspectives in an ongoing and sustainable way, because things are always changing, and how do we keep current in terms of understanding that? And then I think also, infusing disability studies into the curricula. A lot of people talk about in their medical education, they never had any type of training in working with people with disabilities, for example. And how do we make sure that's present and happening? Because I think, again, it doesn't equip our doctors, our nurses, our public health practitioners in the best way if their only experience might be incidental. And again, they may fall back on stereotypes, or they may just not perceive all the different opportunities their work and their role could have in keeping things moving forward. And I think then inclusive practices being the norm, this proactive approach to accommodation. You think of curb cuts and how much those have really helped a broad array of people, everything from mothers with strollers to FedEx men that are sort of rolling things into buildings, to people using a wheelchair or a scooter or a walker. We've all benefited from those curb cuts, and yet it took so long to get them. And so how do we start to move forward with these proactive approaches? Like captioning is another example. It's been shown that educationally everyone benefits from captions being in place. And I've used them for years and years and years, not just because of my work in disability services, but again, it's helpful. I like to watch a lot of British TV, and you can't always understand people really easily. So again, understanding the impact that some of these things that we have sort of isolated and acted like they might only affect a few, they affect a huge percentage of the population, and understanding how do we sort of integrate these perspectives and move things forward proactively, because it helps us all. And then finally, just thinking about, as we've moved forward with our climate, like how it feels to actually have people all feeling welcome and included, and what a difference that makes in terms of seeing people thrive and be their best selves, be their full selves, when they're not having to put so much energy into getting access, debating when's the right moment to disclose or not, and hiding parts of who they are, right? We want our community to be inclusive of all different identities. And especially so that we can then provide the best sort of educational opportunities for those around us. Because I do think when people share, as we've talked about during this talk, authentically about themselves and their own experiences, that's part of coming together in an educational institution, right? Like, we're here to benefit from each other's perspectives. And if that's not happening fully, then we're all losing.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Yes, I think, to your points, disability affects us all, right? It's the one group that anyone can join at any time, and we need to recognize that. And I hope from this discussion, people understand that we will and should use the momentum from this important anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the ADA, to, I think, as Gloria said, recalibrate the scales of disability social justice and address the disability disparities so that people with disabilities can thrive in any environment. I think that's the goal. I do think we have a really unique opportunity, and we need to work together to do that. But I am hopeful that we can. And COVID certainly is a challenging time, but hopefully it will actually help to propel us to move forward actually towards that goal even faster. So I want to thank you all so much for taking time to be a part of this conversation. I'm immensely grateful for all your perspectives, and I just want to thank each of you for all you've done for the disability community at Hopkins. You've all made a huge impact on my life, and I'm immensely grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swenor.
Yeah.
Thank you.